Hello and welcome to the Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. This week our guest is the maestro of political journalists and the friend of the show, Ron Brownstein. Remember, we love taking your questions, so write to politicswarroom@gmail.com for next week's show. We're going to get to as many as we can, but don't forget to tell us where you're from. You also can get text updates about what's next for Politicon and Politics War Room by signing up at Politicon.com. So tell your friends about us. Remind them to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And please check out the links to our sponsors, Green Chef and Beam, in our episode show notes. We thank you for supporting these sponsors because it really helps make this podcast happen. Hey, James, beware the Ides of September. You know, we talk about the November 4 elections as we should this year's, but before that, this month is a political legislative Super Bowl. Government shutdown could happen September 30th unless some kind of a deal is made. What should the Democrats do? Supreme Court may take up a whole lot of issues. Trump's authority to send armed forces into American cities, slapped down by a California judge, whether to uphold an appeals court decision that nixed his Trump tariffs, whether he can use a rationale to control the supposedly independent Federal Reserve, and the Jeffrey Epstein saga scandal continues. I just watched Ro Khanna, a Democrat, and Republican Tom Massey, accompanied by right-wing Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, with about a dozen of those survivors or their lawyers on the steps of the Capitol. It is incredible. And what they're saying is, release the documents. Donald Trump, vow you're not going to pardon this criminal, Ghislaine Maxwell, who is just as bad in many ways as Jeffrey Epstein. And don't let Republicans get away with this, if you'll pardon the expression, bullshit about James Comer offering an alternative, which has no teeth in it at all. That discharge petition will, if they defeat that discharge petition, those women said two things. Number one, we will go in any district to talk about why they did that. And number two, they said, we're going to put the names out if they don't. Usually I don't pay a lot of attention to people who've been involved in a political fight. These women, I think, are different. They've got a lot of courage, a lot of guts, and they're all in now.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we look at this thing as a political event. Is it embarrassing for him? And and people forget they're real people in here that suffered real consequence and real pain. And I always, anybody that has daughters, I guess, it becomes apropos. What would you have done if someone had done that to one of your children? And I mean, these women have wives, they had parents.
Unlike Michael Dukakis, I'd have tried to kill him.
Yeah, okay. They had lives, they had hopes, they had all kinds of things. And what was taken away from them is something, we need to remember. And yes, it is political jockeying, and some of the lying is really remarkable. I mean, we forget the role that Dershowitz and Ken Starr and that
Alex Acosta
played. I mean, this is so. There's just a lot of pain at the bottom of this pit, a real lot.
Yeah.
And I hope that these women that come forward or feel some sense of relief. Let's hope it was kind of a cathartic event for them, and I hope other people do come forward. But man, these people ruined a lot of lives.
Well, it's cathartic, and they are watching them. I'm convinced they're determined. If they try to cover this up, if James Comer and Trump try to cover this up, if they manage to deep six that discharge petition that Khanna and Massey are bringing, which would require full disclosure of this, if they try to do that, I don't think these women are going to be quiet. I think they're emboldened now. It took them time and a lot of courage to come out, but they're out now, and I just think they're going to be a force.
Yeah, I don't think that Marjorie Taylor Greene's I don't think she's going to try to put this genie back in the bottle.
I all the critical things I've said about Marjorie Taylor Greene, for the first time in my life, I felt good about her this morning.
Well, I mean, she seems to be, I mean, never known someone's history, but she's mad about this. I think it's genuine.
Right. Well, you ought to be mad. Yes, I
Something to be
agree.
mad about. No, I mean, I'm giving her credit for being that which I wasn't sure she was before, to being us being human.
Yeah, but she's standing up.
She is.
James, on the government threat of a government shutdown, I think Democrats should play tough selectively and say, hey, if you want our vote, they can't pass it without their vote. We're going to demand a couple things. We're going to demand extending the Obamacare subsidies, which are set to expire in December. They jack up premiums and add to the uninsured, which already will be adversely affected by earlier policies. They will prohibit Trump from these pocket rescissions, which people like Susan Collins, a Republican, says are clearly illegal and unconstitutional, and a couple other healthcare things. So you have to meet those demands. They can't relitigate the whole big, ugly, beautiful bill, but they can, I think, target 3 or 4 really important things. And if the Republicans resist that, if they say, no, we won't defend extending the Obamacare subsidies, let them pay more, then, fine, take a shutdown.
Yeah. And so just tell me and tell our listeners here, they need to get 60 votes to get the budget passed. Is that they can't do it? They can't jimmy it around and do it for 50?
Right. They need a majority in the House. This is not reconciliation. This is, a continuing resolution. They haven't passed the appropriations bills, which they said they were going to. Of course, the Democrats didn't either. And they got to get a majority in the House, and they have to get 60 votes in the Senate. And, if the Democrats offer a palatable alternative extending the Obamacare subsidies, they expire December 31st. That means people are going to lose health insurance or they're going to jack up their premiums. That's a hell of a good issue. And but if they don't act by September 30th, or if they postpone it to November, there is a government shutdown.
And do you think the Republicans would take that?
I think the instinct of the Republicans on the House would be not to take it. It doesn't depend. Mike Johnson doesn't control anything. He's a puppet. It's whether Trump will take it.
Right.
I mean, first of all, Trump doesn't care substantively about any of these issues. It's all politics to him. If he thinks he can embarrass the Democrats when they didn't vote for a shutdown, he'll go for a shutdown. But on the other hand, if it's something that may not work to his advantage and may hurt the economy, he may tell little Mikey Johnson, hey, cave.
Well, but traditionally, you remember cover these things much longer and much more detail than I did. The party in power usually gets blamed when something goes wrong.
Yeah, if there's a shutdown that lasts 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, that affects the economy. And Trump's not going to be able to say next March or next June, the economy would have been better if the Democrats had voted for a continuing resolution last September.
And I like your strategy, and we would have been happy to vote for it, but we weren't going to leave X number of million people hanging there with no health insurance.
Right. And we're not going to let you get away with what the leaders of your own party's appropriation committee said is an illegal, unconstitutional act. Those so-called pocket rescissions. This is money that's already been approved by Congress, and he just is arbitrarily counting on an obsequious Supreme Court. Tries to pull it back. I think that's another good issue.
Yeah, I'm going to make a prediction. It's always a danger in predicting. I predict by maybe even the end of the year, Susan Collins announces she's not going to run for re-election.
Yeah.
I think her antenna is actually pretty good. And, she's a very successful politician. And I think it's starting to dawn on her that the jig is up, and I just don't think she has the desire to go through the public humiliation that she's getting ready to go through. I think
you're absolutely right. And I saw today that John E. Sununu, the former senator, is thinking about running for the Senate. John E., you don't know what it's like now. Baby, it ain't like when you were there. First of all, I'm not sure he could win. I doubt he could. But it would be a miserable experience right now to be in that Senate, no matter which party controls it.
Yeah, it's sort of hard to see, given the direction it seems that 2026 is going to. that the Democrats are not going to win a Senate seat in New Hampshire. I agree, it's a very purple state, but I don't see any evidence that this is not going to be a big Democratic year. And you can see it in retirements and recruitments and everywhere that you want. It's right in front of you. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the untold story, James, is the Democratic House recruitments. They are replicating 2018. They have national security women running everywhere. Arizona, New Hampshire for a House seat, Pennsylvania. I mean, they've really got some strong candidates out there, and they're strikingly similar. Yeah, they're strikingly similar to that Jason Crow, Mikey Sherrill, Abigail Spanberger crowd.
So much of people, it's in all Fox talks about is woke Democrats, right? And there's some 10% of the Democratic Party does. I don't see, and I know Jason is no identity politics guy at all, and I don't think the people they're recruiting at all fit that bill.
They're right. They don't.
No.
James, Wednesday morning while the women were holding that press conference, huge story, I turned to Fox. You know what they were talking about? Left-wing censorship in London.
Of course.
Pro-trans left-wingers in London.
But their viewers think of Democrats, what they've been told about Democrats. My God, it's one that there's not more political violence out there.
Yeah.
Of what Democrats are.
Yeah. James, one thing I point out, and we try to do this every week, you remember that Donald Trump was going to end inflation, end the cost of living on day one. I just want to tell our viewers out there, our listeners out there, if you were counting on that, don't go buy sneakers in the next couple of weeks, because you're going to have sticker shock. For some reason, the Donald hasn't been able to bring down the cost of living for footwear.
Well, footwear, go out and try to buy insurance of any kind. You'll find out where it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the level of failure of this government. And I just want to talk briefly about India, which is the largest population in the world. I don't know how to tell you this, but these are some pretty bright people. You ever go look at the faculty of top American medical schools? You might be
right.
And why are we running them away from us? I have no idea.
Well, James, let me tell you, I think I may know. I read this at least. Trump was furious because Modi wouldn't give him credit for ending the India-Pakistan war, which of course he did not. And also, Modi would not endorse him for a Nobel Prize. So Trump said, this at least according to reports, Trump said, great, I'll hit you with a 50% tariff.
If you stop and you think about it, the president of the United States, the whole idea is that person would act in the interests of the country.
Right.
I mean, I'm sorry, man. The more I read about George Washington, the greater man that George Washington was, but you don't need this show to tell you George Washington was a great man. Trump, it's all about him. The presidency is relative to him individually, not the country. And it's never been anybody close and more out front about it. Yeah, that's he didn't nominate me for the Nobel Prize, so I'm going to put a tariff on him. Everything is about, nothing is about the country. It's just, shit, this gets me worse and worse.
We got to get something to get us all out of this funk. How great is saving money by getting fresh, healthy, easy-to-make meals delivered with Green Chef, James?
It really makes a lot of difference. And they're good, too.
Yeah, they really are. Because, when we get to the end of summer, there's something about it that always makes you feel your best. So that means it's the perfect time to create healthy meal habits that last. We're used to quizzing politicians and officials. Now we have to ask you, Is there a better time to get Green Chef, the #1 meal kit for clean eating, than right now? I can give you the answer. The answer is no. If you haven't heard, Green Chef makes it easier to spend less time in the kitchen and more time enjoying the final weeks of summer. We're amazed that their new heat and eat meals, the way they are made, so you can enjoy delicious, wholesome meals in just 3 minutes. It's perfect supporting your wellness journey, and Green Chef recipes feature fresh, organic, seasonal produce with 100% responsibly sourced proteins to help you feel your best. Green Chef's real clean ingredients help you build lasting, healthy habits without the hassle. Enjoy salads ready in just 5 minutes, protein-filled breakfast of nutrient-rich smoothies to fuel your day with 80-plus dietitians-approved weekly meal options. That's 80-plus. Green Chef is ready to nurture your nutritional needs. They make it easy to find meals that fit your lifestyle. You can even pick from Mediterranean, gluten-free, plant-based, protein-heavy, and even gut and brain health and calorie-smart choices also. The recipes change every week, and with week-to-week flexibility, you can adjust your plan to match your mood and your schedule. After switching to Green Chef, we have a great excuse to prepare food for our friends and families. I'll tell you, the lemon garlic shrimp and creamy risotto is so good, you can head back to Europe if you couldn't get meals like this delivered right to your door. So don't wait. End the season by making the summer your healthiest yet with the Green Chef. Head to greenchef.com/50warroom and use the code 50warroom to get 50% off your first month. Then 20% off for 2 months with free shipping. That's code 50warroom at greenchef.com/50warroom.
If you're going to be cooking, chef it with Green Chef.
James, our guest, is our good friend and one of America's premier reporters, Ron Brownstein, now with Bloomberg Opinion and still a CNN political analyst. Ron, few, if any, understand the nexus of politics and policy as well as you. Let's weigh the political future for the foreseeable time, at least, of the two parties. Republicans make the case that Trump totally dominates the agenda, and Trumpism will for years. Democrats are reacting. They're losing registered voters. Still saddled with a woke image will be reinforced if the socialist mayor of New York wins. Democrats trace a lot of their problems to Joe Biden, who's gone. They charge Trump as overreaching, giving them winning issues like cutting Medicaid, and Virginia and New Jersey gubernatorial contests with mainstream progressives will be more important for the future than New York City. And they have a deeper bench. Which argument is more persuasive?
Wow, that is a great way to frame it, Al. I think that it's premature to assume that Trumpism is the dominant force in the country as opposed to the Republican Party going forward. I think that, we are in a situation where certainly I can't imagine the Republican Party going back at any point in the near future to kind of a Nikki Haley, Mitt Romney vision. I think that, revolutions within a party, as you know, are self-reinforcing. That essentially the primary electorate gets reshaped by the winning force. And a lot of the people who resisted it, the kind of the Nikki Haley, Mitt Romney Republicans, they're gone. They're not participating in Republican primaries anymore, presidential primaries. And we saw the 24 primary was to the right of the 16 primary when Trump won the first time. And I think that'll be the case for the near future. A lot of those white collar suburban Republicans who would have been the basis of kind of a return to pre-Trumpism, they're not voting in Republican primaries. And I think that means you see the Republican senators and the Republican governor candidates and certainly the presidential candidate are going to be in this mold. Exactly what the Democratic Party is going forward, I think, is more up in the air. Although my guess is that 28 is a lot like election James would know pretty well, which is 1992. I do think that it is almost inevitable, and we can talk about some of the specific characters in a minute. It is almost inevitable that the next Democratic nominee moves to diffuse some of the cultural issues that have hurt the party in recent years, particularly the border and some of the transgender issues, in the same way that Clinton had to move past welfare and crime in 92 to be heard on his economic message. I think the eventual nominee is going to make that calculation in 28. And, at that point, we're still in a jump ball country. I mean, I think that Trump's victory in 24 was a layer cake where his base is still what it was, maybe 45% of the country. And he was put over the top by voters who were not, I underscore, really voting on the ideological contrast between the parties, but were rendering a verdict on Biden's presidency. I mean, there's just no history for the president's party holding the White House if he is unpopular as Biden was when he left office. And that is true whether the president runs or not. I mean, Truman in 52, it went the other way. Bush in 08, it went the other way, when they left. You don't need the president to run to have that throw the bums out. So Republicans have certain advantages if Democrats can't roll back their inroads among non-college, non-white voters. But there's no reason, I don't think there's any reason why they can't roll back those inroads, because I think the last few points that Trump got were based on conditions, not a fundamental ideological assessment of the party. So yes, Democrats have a lot of work to do to rebuild their image. It's the weakest it was since Carville and his team, helped Clinton win the nomination in 92. But I think it is repairable as it was for Clinton. The three elections of the 80s were worse than anything we've seen in the Trump era. The Democrats won the smallest share of the available electoral college votes in the three elections before Clinton than any party had won in any three election sequence since the formation of the modern party system in 1828. And then he won re-election. Obviously had bumps along the way. So I do think a strong nominee in 28 can reframe the party and can put them back in. Democrats have to compete in more places. 25 states have voted for Trump in all three elections. Republicans now hold all 50 of their Senate seats, which is, kind of a problem when you're trying to get to a majority. But on the national level, I do think that the ability for Democrats to recover is there, but it's going to take something like, maybe not as overt, kind of sister soldier type overt as Clinton did, but something like what did reposition the party.
Let me get to the Democrats in a minute, but first, you've written about Trump's threats to undermine free, fair elections, gerrymandering, criticizing mail ballots, telling states he controls federal elections.
Yeah.
How much do you think he will succeed? And is there this is a question I never would have asked before, is there any possibility, do you think, if facing defeat, he will try to find an excuse to cancel or postpone the midterms?
I no longer think anything is beyond the boundaries of the possible. I think that we have moved so far, so fast through all of these safeguards that people thought existed that I do not rule out anything going forward. You'd still say there'd be very long odds of that. I think it is more likely he tries to put a big, more than a thumb, like a whole hand on the scale in a way that undermines the fairness of the 26th election, including potentially deploying the National Guard into blue cities and around blue polling places to discourage turnout. I think that is very much, I don't think you have to leap very far from what he is threatening in blue cities now to get there. I think that they've established multiple units at both U.S. Attorney's Office and the Justice Department to prosecute local election officials. They're already intervening to support conservative groups that that are in court demanding purges of voter rolls. I think they're going to be doing a whole series of things to try to change the rules and to tilt it. Obviously, the gerrymandering front and center. Talk about doing a new census somehow, which I think is a reach. I think canceling the election is obviously at the far end of the possibility, but I don't rule anything out.
Boy, I do think that some of the media hand-wringing about the Democrats is overwrought. To be sure, they have problems. I've seen them in worse situations, one of which you cited. And the out party at this juncture rarely has a national leader. I mean, that's just a great myth.
Isn't that the point?
But,
yeah.
Yeah, but the decline in Democratic registration and voter registration is serious. Why and what are they and can they do about this?
I don't think they can do a hell of a lot about it until they find a presidential nominee who inspires the public. As you pointed out, as the out party, you are led primarily by your congressional leadership, and they are inherently narrow, maybe especially narrow in this case. I mean, I think there are a lot of Democrats who feel with justification that Schumer and Jeffries are not meeting the moment. I wrote a piece Sunday about their use of the word distraction. Like whenever Trump does something that threatens Democratic safeguards, particularly sending the troops into cities, Schumer and Jeffries and Pelosi as well, other national Democratic members of Congress, they will criticize it, but they invariably say he is trying to distract from something else, whether it's the Epstein files or the Medicaid cuts or inflation. And, by using that word, I think they are signaling that they don't consider these anti-democratic actions as important as whatever else they say he's distracting from, usually the Medicaid tax bill. And that reflects their desire. They want to run on, they want to run essentially what Bill Clinton ran against Newt or what Tip O'Neill ran against Reagan. They cut programs that benefit the middle class to fund tax cuts for their rich friends. There are a lot of Democrats who feel that completely misses the moment. And that's why you're getting such a response to Governors Newsom in California and Pritzker in Illinois, who are willing to say, no, this other stuff is not a distraction. This is the main event. And I think they are right that if you ask me, what is the main goal of Trump in his second term? I wouldn't say it's cutting taxes for rich people, much less cutting Medicaid, which is not something he's ever been interested in. I think his main goal is eroding, if not crushing, the ability of institutions in American society to resist him and to entrench a sustained advantage for MAGA in elections, whether the public wants them there or not. I would say this is the main event. This is not a difference.
But Ron, I totally agree with you, but I don't think it's mutually exclusive.
No.
To stand up as Newsom and Pritzker and Wes Moore are doing, and at the same time, any congressional candidate that doesn't mention Medicaid cuts every day is losing a day for November 26th. I don't think they're exclusive.
No, I think that's right, but I think there is a real choice there in emphasis. And to be fair to Democrats, all the political scientists, I don't know if you had Brendan Nyan or Susan Stokes on the show ever, but people who study this around the world say this debate and problem is not unique to Democrats. Parties all over the world running against quasi-authoritarian opponents, trying to entrench some version of strongman rule, divide. Do you run on conventional politics or do you run on their anti-democratic actions? Do you run on the price of eggs or do you run on troops in the streets? And most parties make the same decision that Schumer and Jeffries and Pelosi, and I think most congressional candidates will make, which is that you run on the price of eggs primarily, or Medicaid cuts in this case. The danger in that, of course, is that there really isn't any institution that is fully sounding the alarm on the magnitude of the many ways in which Trump is trying to centralize presidential power and unilaterally resist the ability of other institutions, whether it's law firms, universities, the media, local governments, state governments, to resist him and what he is doing. I mean, all of those institutions have kind of failed to fully sound an alarm, much less to link arms together. And, when you have Chuck Schumer saying sending troops into Chicago is an attempt to distract you from the Epstein files, he's not exactly sounding a clarion call of concern either. He is implicitly saying that isn't really as important, that important because it's just a distraction. And you lose that. And Trump has been able to move further, faster in a Hungary-like direction than I think you or I would have said on the morning after the election last year.
I agree. I couldn't agree with you more on that.
The barriers aren't as firm, and I forget the guy's name, but who was Biden's ambassador to Hungary, wrote a piece in the New York Times in July that I think was the most important thing written in the second Trump term, which basically says that all of the elites in society are making the same bet they did in Hungary, which is that they can cut their own deal with the devil, in the sense of this force that's trying to impose his will over them. And they were wrong there and they're wrong here. The only way to stop it is to kind of collectively call it out on a nonpartisan basis. It is not the society we want to live in, where you have to pass armored Humvees to get to and from work in half a dozen American cities, or law firms have to wonder about who they're representing if the federal government will punish them. But we haven't seen that. And we're not seeing that from Democratic leaders. And, you know, can I just say, you know, what I wrote about Newsom a couple of weeks ago is I think people are misunderstanding what he is doing. He is doing two things at once. He is moving to the front of the line among Democrats in pushing back against Trump. But he is also, in a Clinton-like way, and citing Clinton, citing opportunity, community, and responsibility, moving to the center on a lot of issues. And he's challenging the idea that the only way you can resist Trump is to move left. And he's pursuing instead what I call confrontational centrism. I don't know if that will take him all the way to the nomination, but I bet the core insight that he's advancing, which is that you can get through a Democratic primary by emphasizing your willingness to fight Trump. And that could free you from the obligation to move left on a lot of social issues that can hurt you in the general election. I think that is the winning formula for Democrats in 28, whether he, as the governor of California and former mayor of San Francisco, is the one who can take advantage of it or not. I do think whether it's Wes Moore or Andy Beshear or whoever, they are going to try some version of that to satisfy primary voters through their willingness to stand up against Trump without taking positions that will hurt them in a general election. And in fact, moving in a Clinton-like way to neutralize some of these social issues so you can focus a populist economic critique on Republicans, as Clinton did in 92.
James?
So, Brian, recently, this was Tuesday night in Florida, there was a House Senate special and it's a State House Senate special, State House special, both blue districts. However, in the Senate district, the candidate beat Harris's performance by 22 points. In the House district, it beat Harris's performance by 15 points. This is pretty consistent around the country since the election.
Yeah.
People will say, yeah, but James, that's off year, and the out party is always more fired up. These are generally not very high turnout elections. Is this indicative of something going into 26, do you think?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. That counter to it really doesn't undermine the idea that it's indicative of 26, because basically, I think two things are true. Historically, the out party is more motivated in midterm elections than the party in power. I mean, that's just, you know, we see that through all of history. Now we're getting a magnification of that because the Democrats now run better among college than non-college voters, and non-college voters are more reliable voters. And the college-educated share of the midterm electorate is consistently in the modern era 2 to 3 points higher than it is in the presidential year. So you would expect that the 26 electorate is going to be more Democratic leaning for both of those reasons, the traditional imbalance and interest between the in and out party, but also the college bonus for Democrats. You expect that the 26 electorate is going to be more Democratic leaning than the 24 electorate. But importantly, it's also going to be more Democratic leaning than the 28 electorate. I wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago using data from Catalyst and Pew to argue that the new swing voters are not people who switch between the parties, Al, in the way it was certainly when I started covering politics, and even more when you started covering politics. There were a lot of people who would vote one way for president, one way for senator, or vote for one party in 72 and the other voted for Nixon in 72 and Carter in 76. There aren't that many of those people. There are now roughly 60 million people in each of the last two elections, the presidentials, who cycled in and out of the election, who either voted for the first time or didn't vote after voting 4 years earlier. That was the number in both 20 and 24. Those are the deciders in the presidential years. They are the voters who I think are mostly voting on conditions. And, 26 is not going to tell us much about what they're going to do when they come back in the electorate in 28. In fact, I would argue that the original sin around Biden was not waiting too long to acknowledge his age issues, but taking the wrong lesson from 22 when Democrats did surprisingly well, despite his low approval rating. The gap between the midterm and the presidential, it's always been there. As you know, 94, Clinton got wiped out. 96, he won a very comfortable 370 electoral college vote re-election. But I think it is systematically getting wider. because Democrats do better in the smaller electorate, more college educated, and even more so, it's just more unpredictable. 60 million people cycled in and out of the electorate in each of the last two presidentials. I suspect the number was going to be very high again in 28. So I think that these off-year elections tell us that Democrats probably are going to do okay in the midterm next year, depending on how much Trump can tilt the playing field with gerrymandering and otherwise. So in that sense, they are revealing. They're revealing that we're seeing the same phenomenon we always see. The out party is more engaged. College-educated Democrats are really engaged, and that's going to do Democrats a lot of good in a lot of places, but it doesn't necessarily solve their problems for 28.
So I want to go back to the Schumer-Hakeem response of Trump's deployment of troops or whatever he's doing.
I don't know what you think about it.
It's a distraction.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, I kind of agree with Schumer and Hakeem, because I think that Trump's biggest vulnerability, yet to be exploited sufficiently, is that he would get prices down and end the war in Ukraine on day one. And he's done not even remotely close to either one. And he doesn't want you to think about that.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the whole cost of living thing is what pushed him over the top, which doomed us. Mm-hmm. And he has done nothing. Yeah. I mean, nothing is addressed, and the public knows it.
I totally believe his last 4 or 5 points, particularly among non-white voters, was performance, not ideology. It was that Biden had failed. Their cost of living was out of control. They remembered it being better under Trump, and these other concerns they had about him didn't outweigh their desire to get their life under control, and that he has failed on that. And, I'm not surprised. I mean, it's the economy stupid guy that you end up. But, as I point out in my story, this argument in the Democratic Party does not follow traditional ideological lines. I quoted people on the left and the center on both sides of this. Do you focus on basically the price of eggs, or do you focus more on the authoritarianism? And it is a very legit debate. I think if you are going to maximize your chance of winning 218 House seats, you would lean more toward the price of eggs. It's going to be relevant in more districts that you have to win. I, however, think that the cost of not raising an alarm about this is really high, both in terms of antagonizing a lot of your own voters, but also, more importantly, substantively, because Trump is, if nothing else, a student of human weakness. And he is taking the reluctance of Democrats to confront him on this ground, broadly speaking, undermining democratic safeguards, that ground, he is taking their reluctance to confront him as an invitation to go further. And, Timothy Snyder, who didn't follow his own advice by, moving to Canada, his first rule in his book is make the would-be strong man fight for every inch. And really, nobody's doing that. Not enough law firms. People are filing lawsuits, and that's about it. Like, not much else. I mean, there was the No Kings rally. But it's hard to look across American society and say we are seeing a serious pushback that would cause Trump to think twice about sending troops into more cities. We're not at all. You're not seeing that from Democrats. A lot of whom are worried that what this makes them look like on crime, as if you cannot separate the issue of crime from the issue of occupying, of Humvees rolling down Michigan Avenue, in Chicago, or Broadway in New York. So I think there is a cost to this, although I agree, I think, like I said, if you're going to maximize your chance of getting 280 House seats, as Al said, you're going to talk about cutting Medicaid to fund tax cuts for rich people, and he hasn't brought down prices. That's what you're going to emphasize. But I really think the substantive costs of downplaying this, much less calling it a distraction, is very high.
Yeah, I would hope, and I think there's some evidence that the Democrat protestation is manifesting itself in elections. Of course, we're going to see a little more clearly in Virginia and New Jersey.
What do you think of the word distraction, James?
Well, just whenever something, there's gone nothing. I mean, the Ukraine stuff with the meeting with Putin was more than a disaster. It was just a goddamn humiliation on every level it could be. You have Z and you got Putin and now we got India with 1.5 billion people. We didn't run him away from us. I mean, I don't know how many people he's run away from us. And, he talks about putting troops here, doing this. He's done nothing on inflation. He's got cost of living. The insurance costs are going through the roof everywhere you turn around. And I think when he makes a lot of these big plays, like going to Chicago, going to Washington or Los Angeles or wherever he's going, I think part of his thing is, I'm not going to talk about this. I'm going to start talking about crime, which is my strong suit and a Democrat's weakness. Not quite sure why, because Democrats know how to deal with crime very effectively, and that is more cops, less guns. But I don't know why we don't say it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a point of view that says if it's ground that he wants to fight on, inherently you should look for other ground. And then there's another point of view that says in war, in conflict, you don't get to choose always. Sometimes you have to meet them head on. And if Trump can portray what he is doing in cities as effectively restoring order and fighting crime, because the public is not consistently hearing another point of view that says, really, this is about ceding the ground for authoritarianism and numbing Americans to an image that is more common in totalitarian than democratic countries of troops patrolling the streets of major cities. I think that's a high cost. I do. I mean, I just think that, I think ceding this ground to him, both politically and substantively, doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm sympathetic to those who argue that the Democrats' best chance of reaching 218 is to hammer him on economic issues, and I think most House candidates are going to do that. It's not the job of the person running in Iowa 2 to kind of convince people that Trump is a danger to their civil liberties and to democratic safeguards, but the national leadership in framing a national debate, I think, has a different obligation. And I think the reluctance of Jeffries and Schumer and others to step into this is a big reason why there is this frustration and feeling of an urgent need for generational replacement among so many Democrats. And, whether or not Gavin Newsom's going to be the nomination, it's not nothing that he's now polling 15 to 20 in some of these states where Shapiro, Whitmer, Moore, are 3 and 4. And there's a core
advantage of having this state be targeted.
He's responding in a way that most Democratic voters, I think, want to see. And again, to me, the question is, can you get through the primary as a fighter, not a purist? Because in 2020, too many of them tried to be a purist and ultimately created vulnerabilities. Biden didn't really have to do either. He just kind of, he was the last man standing who wasn't Bernie, and people rallied to him. I think in 28, I do think Spanberger and Sherrill are more reflective of the center of gravity in the Democratic Party than Mamdani, but I do think that if he wins, it is going to be a sign, not that the left is necessarily going to win the 28 nomination, but it's going to be formidable. And you're going to have to be formidable to beat it. And you're going to need a strategy to beat it. There's going to be someone articulating that point of view. And I think that the way to thread that needle may be what I call confrontational centrism. You rely on your opposition to Trump to get you through the primary without checking all the litmus test boxes that might hurt you in a general election. And that's the updated Clinton third way of 92.
Yeah, I'm going out of top, but I think the identity politics, I think has that many adherents in the Democratic Party anymore. I mean, I think it was terrible. It cost us dearly, but I don't see people talking like that very much. I really don't.
I commend people to I don't know if you got 4 hours of your life, but Newsom did a 4-hour podcast interview with a conservative podcast host, Sean Ryan, I think his name is, and, quoted Clinton, James, quoted opportunity, community, and responsibility, several times. He's even starting to jab a little like Clinton with his left hand. But took a lot of positions cooperating with ICE on violent criminals, questioning gender, transition care for minors, freezing the availability of undocumented immigrants to get on the state Medicaid program, involuntarily institutionalizing more of the homeless, rolling back environmental review to ease new building. There's a lot of stuff that's going on in terms of kind of either repositioning or loudly calling attention to earlier centrist positions at the same time that people are focusing on and trolling and confronting Trump. And like I said, I think that Democrats are going to need a Clinton-like reset in 28, but as Clinton showed, it is entirely possible to do.
Albert?
Ron, it pains me to ever even slightly disagree with you.
Go.
But the last week of the Harris campaign was all about the danger of an authoritarian government. I think there's at least some evidence that was a mistake. She wasn't talking about the cost of living. She wasn't talking about people's lives. I think you can do both. I think the idea that I think it's a false choice. If you don't talk about how it's affecting your people's health care, how it's affecting their jobs, how it's affecting their cost of living, you can talk about authoritarian governments all you want to, and I think you're going to face a tough time. Secondly, I would just say, why in the hell is if the media treats the mayor of New York City as a more important election than the governorships of Virginia and New Jersey, that's the media's fault. That's not reality,
right?
Well, but that's not. I mean, the mayor of New York City has never been a harbinger for any goddamn thing, and so I sort of agree with James. I think the media accentuates the reach, the clout, the influence of the left wing in the Democratic Party. They don't win in districts that aren't overwhelmingly Democratic and left wing.
Okay, so a couple of things. First, Trump has now done a lot of stuff, Al, that was theoretical in the fall of 24. And, there were not troops. There were not Humvees outside of Union Station in the fall of 24. Mm-hmm. So it is real. Second, I think the people who want to hear more about authoritarianism and democracy completely agree with your point. You have to reconnect it to outcomes that affect your daily lives, and that essentially that he is trying to undermine democratic safeguards to prevent you from registering your discontent over things he's doing, but also to impose a government that favors his billionaire buddies over average people. So I think, whether Sean Clegg, who is, kind of one of Newsom's chief strategists, or Annette Schenker-Osorio, others who on that camp want to hear more about authoritarianism and democracy, they would completely agree with you that you have to connect it. But the point they would make, and did make to me, is how many people were talking about classroom instruction about gender 5 years ago? How many people were talking about trans kids playing sports, high school sports 5 years ago? Parties do not only have to react to what the public says it's worried about. Parties can try to change that and shape that. And that the reluctance of Democratic national leaders, again, leaving this vacuum that Pritzker and Newsom have filled more than anyone else, the reluctance of them to say, hey, this is not normal. What we're watching is not something in the American tradition, is a failure of imagination. You can try to change what the public is concerned about. And, you're not limited. Talking more about this doesn't mean you have to give up talking about Medicaid and the tax cuts, which I think is going to be the central Democratic message, tied into this idea of James. James said he ran on making your cost of living more affordable. He didn't do it. All he did was give his rich buddies more tax cuts.
Ron, let me give you an example. I think the Democrats on crime and the cities going in the big city, Democrats make a colossal mistake when they say crime is down. I mean, God damn it. That's not, it is. Mm-hmm. That's not a winning argument. Instead, what they ought to be saying, yes, there's a crime problem. We need more cops. He's cutting law enforcement assistance. He's cutting aid to police. We could do that. We could send more cops to high crime areas. We don't want to send National Guards and park police who have no goddamn training. And that's what he's doing. I think there's a way to counter that without going. I mean, every time I hear a Democrat saying crime is down, I cringe. Not because it's not.
People always are worried about crime. But Democrats could say all of the things you just said and say this is a really dangerous precedent that he's establishing here. We do not want to live in a country where there are tanks rolling through the streets routinely of our cities. And many are not willing to do that. They're not willing to say, they might say the National Guard isn't really going to help, but outside of kind of Newsom and Pritzker, you don't hear a lot of the national leaders saying, no, this is affirmatively bad.
Wes Moore is doing it too, verbally.
Right. So this is the governors. This is there are reasons. Not only is this not going to help, this is a really dangerous thing. We do not want to be a country where that scene in MacArthur Park a few weeks ago, it looked like Baghdad, here in LA, when all of these heavily armored guys get out of, heavily armored vehicles, and then men on horseback start parading through the park where kids are playing soccer. Like, is that the country you want to live in, where that is a routine sight? And, again, I think it is a tactical and a strategic mistake to be afraid to raise that question because you're worried about looking soft on crime,
I agree with that. Let me ask one question, then turn it back to James. Let's say politicians are stocks and you are an investor. Which stocks would you buy and which would you sell? Who would you buy and who would you sell?
Thinking about 28 or just in general?
In general, in the futures, 26, 28, 30.
I think Spanberger and Sherrill are important, and Spanberger especially could be a future vice president. I think Newsom and Wes Moore are the two. I think the Democrats who are keeping their head down in this moment and want to run for president in 28 are making a huge mistake. Do you remember 2000? What was Al Gore's chant against Bill Bradley? Stay and fight, wasn't it? Wasn't it stay and fight? About after Bradley retired in 98 in the midst of the Gingrich Revolution. I think if you're not on the field at this moment, you're going to have a hard time being the Democratic nominee in 28. And I think someone like Whitmer, who has chosen a very different path, I think has really marginalized her prospects in 28. I think even Shapiro, who should be a major force, by choosing mostly to keep his head down, not entirely, he's been, vocal on the Medicaid in particular. I think the Democratic voters of 28 are going to be looking for people who are on the field in the arena at this moment.
I think your point is a very good. I would just say about Shapiro that next year, if he is able to score a huge victory and sweep in 3 Democratic House members, that may change his dynamic.
I think he could be a major player too, but I think being on the field at this moment when so much seems at risk and the national leadership has left such a vacuum, I think is really going to matter to a lot. Now, look, Newsom is pursuing what is fundamentally an electability strategy as the governor of California and former mayor of San Francisco. So a lot of people who are attracted to the strategy may not think he's the right messenger to carry it off. It may be, more Wes Moore or someone else who ultimately benefits from what he is doing. But I think there's going to be a real, I think the people who are in there pushing back every day are earning themselves a lot of goodwill with Democratic primary voters. But I do think that, that it's wrong to assume that means you have to go left. And I think Newsom is showing that. I think Spanberger's not really, dialing up the resistance to Trump. Like, for example,
she wasn't left to begin with.
But she's also not positioning herself in the forefront of fighting Trump. I think she said she would not do a mid-decade redistricting. So those are the two dimensions. I look at it's not only left, right, it's fighter, accommodator. Like those are the two.
James, close out this fascinating conversation.
So Ron, the concern about authoritarianism or democracy or that sort of basket full of issues is determined a lot by education. The more educated you are, and that's always the Democratic Party, is we have increasingly influence of educated people, but we don't have the ability to appeal to, as Trump would call them, he loves the poorly educated. Yes. So I'll just use Trump. We have trouble communicating with the poorly educated who don't seem to be that concerned about this issue. Is that a picture that you see?
Yes, totally. That is absolutely right. I mean, in the midterm, you need a lot of turnout from your high educated base if you're the Democrats. The thing with lower middle income voters is, yes, they can, particularly women, non-college, white and non-white women, probably will be somewhat responsive to the Medicaid argument. I noted in a story a few weeks ago that Democrats did better among non-college white women in the 2018 election than they did in any of the midterms around it. And that was the Affordable Care Act election. So yeah, there's a few points to be squeezed out by emphasizing the priorities. They're cutting taxes for the rich and endangering programs that will help keep your parents secure in their nursing home or your kids on Medicaid. But I think the broader problem with non-college voters, particularly non-college non-white voters, is not really solvable through policy proposals. It's solvable through performance, and positive or negative. Like, I think Democrats can do better among those voters in 28 if we get to the end of the Trump presidency and they think he hasn't delivered for them. If they think he has delivered for them, I think it's going to be hard to win a lot of them back. But if they feel like he hasn't, and so far the polling is very clear they feel like he hasn't, his approval rating, by the way, the most important thing Trump did in 24 was improve his performance among non-college, non-white voters, Black and Hispanic and Asian American non-college voters. His approval rating among them as a group right now is in the 20s. So, they are not feeling they're getting what they hope for. And I think if they have that feeling all the way to 28 and the Democratic nominee does a Clinton-like repositioning and doesn't drive them away on a lot of social issues, the Democrats will claw back at least some of his gains there, at least, enough to put back in play Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Georgia and Nevada. But I don't know how much they can do.
North Carolina.
I don't know how much they can do before that from a policy point of view to win back those voters. And also, not that many of them are going to vote in 26 anyway. So we're not going to really get a good read on what they're thinking.
I got to just quickly, because I'll let you go in too good of a conversation. I can't pass this up. I'm hearing from some people who are actually pretty smart saying that what the Republicans are doing in Texas, creating these 5 extra districts, is going to expose them in other places, and be careful what you wish for, because this may weaken other Republicans. Do you see in California, Missouri, wherever it is, can you see this redistricting stuff coming back and not ending the way that they think it's going to end?
I think the individual districts are mostly going to end the way they think it's going to end, because people can draw these now with incredible precision. Although some of the Valley districts in Texas, Trump's numbers among Hispanics are way below his vote. So there's no guarantee that they're going to flip all those districts.
That's the theory, that these maps are based on 2024 performance.
But I think most of them, if you draw a district now to favor one party, that party is usually going to win it. Obviously, they can't do that in all cases. I think where this could hurt Republicans is on inspiring more Democratic turnout around the idea that Trump is trying to rig the election and he's undermining American democracy, and getting more college-educated, probably white voters in the suburbs of Philadelphia to come out, or in around Scranton, or in some of these other other places. But I think you can draw districts. By the way, as I said, I've seen 2 different estimates from 2 different people I trust that, the post-2020 redistricting turned out to be, Al, a pretty good success. I mean, not that the parties were angels in how they drew the lines, but they kind of offset each other to the point where most experts said the party that won the majority of the popular vote was going to win the majority of the House after the lines we had in 22 and 24. Now, if Republicans can redistrict everywhere, gerrymander everywhere that Trump is trying to get them, that will no longer be true. Democrats will probably have to win the popular vote by 2 to 2.5 points to win the majority. But in a midterm election with a Trump approval at 45 or below, that is very doable. I mean, that
they won it by 8 in 18.
There you go. Yeah. So you can't, I mean, that's why people have to keep an eye on the other things he might do to try to tilt the playing field in that, in that 26 and certainly the 28 elections. And again, like whatever the political strategy, the substantive cost of allowing him to feel that he can continue to pursue these anti-democratic actions without real fear of pushback from anywhere in society, I think is really substantial. And whatever the electoral calculus, just allowing this to go unchallenged, violating Snyder's first rule of never give an inch, I think has really substantive costs. And I think is whatever the electoral calculation is a mistake, much less calling it a distraction, which I think demoralizes a lot of the Democratic base. And for that matter, sends a message to swing voters that you don't consider this that important.
Okay.
Well, you have to promise that you're going to come back.
Maybe the reason y'all favorite, yes.
Yeah,
maybe early and often. For these
voting in Chicago. I will. We at least have to do one show on the pennant race. We haven't even gotten to that, and the collapse of the Nats, and just all.
All right, we got a lot to do. Ron Brownstein, you're as great as ever.
Thank you, man.
Thank you so much, guys. Always great to be with you. An honor.
The stuff tastes good, and I'm a big believer that when a good night's sleep, you got to have some tools in your toolkit, and this is a big one. This helps. It's relaxing, it tastes good, and it helps you get a good night's sleep. You cannot gonna beat it.
Vacation season is in full swing, but there's no time for slowing down. Every day the headlines keep coming. The noise gets louder, and we get hit with another attempt to distract us, divide us, or wear us down. That's not an accident. Burnout is the goal because if we're exhausted, we're easier to control. So don't give in. Rest is resistance. And one of the most powerful things you can do right now is wake up clear, energized, and ready to show up. Take charge and put your all into what's most important. That's why we use Beam Dreams Powder, a natural sleep blend that helps you get the kind of rest that actually restores you. I mean, let's be honest. You can't stay in the fight if you're constantly running on empty. Luckily, with science-backed ingredients like reishi, L-theanine, magnesium, apigenin, and melatonin, Dream helps you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up ready to organize, resist, and raise hell without the fog or the crash. It tastes incredible, smooth, and delicious. Better yet, Beam is easy. To add your nightly routine, it's simple, effective, and it works. I happen to love chocolate peanut butter, but there's so many great flavors for you to try. Since starting with Dream, we felt sharper, more grounded, more present, and no longer dragging through our mornings or losing entire days to bad sleep. Now you'll be ready to face the day and ready to stand up for the things that matter. It's become a must in nightly routines to help recharge, get up, and stay engaged in what matters most. Unlike other sleep aids, there's no grogginess, no fog, just focus. Beam's Dream Powder has improved over 17.5 million nights of sleep for people across the country, and you can be one of them. So here's the deal. Right now, Beam is offering up to 40% off their best-selling Dream Powder for our listeners. It's a limited-time offer and the perfect way to overcome that exhaustion and stay in the fight every day. Go to shopbeam.com and use the code WARROOM at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/warroom and use the code WARROOM for up to 40% off. Sleep well, wake up ready, the fight continues, and also check out the link in our show notes.
Get the sleep you need with Beam Dream.
And now for the outrage of the week. I hope Rudy Giuliani recovers from injuries suffered in a New Hampshire automobile accident. But the former New York mayor is sleazy to the core. He viciously defamed two innocent Georgia election workers, ruining their lives with lies he told about them, and eventually he had to settle. He still faces a criminal indictment in Arizona. He was disbarred in New York State, and even Republicans paint him as an often out-of-control drunk following the 2020 election. So can you imagine awarding him the Congressional Medal of Freedom? You can if the giver is Donald Trump, debasing one more once respected institution.
Well, yeah, that goes without saying. I agree with you. I hope the guy recovers from whatever it is, but it's really remarkable. For my outrage, also be a part of the show, and is what you see increasingly on the 20th anniversary of Katrina is Look, we did the best we could. That place is just a failed city. There's no reason that we should continue to pump money into it. We tried, and it was never going to work. That was first articulated by one Dennis R. Hassard, who's the longest-serving Republican Speaker of the House in history, who's also served more time in jail than any other Speaker of the House in history, I think. So I found the coverage and commentary, much of it, to be very disappointing on this 20th anniversary, and I'm glad that we have the opportunity to correct the record.
All right, and now for our listeners' questions, which really are challenging and wonderful. Jeff in St. Pete Beach, Florida, James, says, is Trump out pivoting Democrats on crime?
Well, thank you from our friend from St. Pete. Probably right now, he kind of is. And the Democratic response has to be the two things that are overwhelmingly popular that you can do that have been done before that actually work. And that is, one, ban assault weapons. There's no reason you can't do that. You're going to win the presidency in 2028. And it's a pretty good chance that you control both the House and the Senate. Well, when you get it, do a 75% issue right off the bat. The next one is do what we did in 94. Make provisions to hire another 100, 150, 200,000 cops. And the federal government supports cities or counties or parishes of whatever jurisdiction you have to put more boots on the ground. You can do these two things. And he's not doing either one. But you have strength in your message, and you have to use it.
Well, do that, and for God's sakes, don't keep talking about, the issue is crime is going down. It is. That's not what you want to talk about, because people who get assaulted or have carjacked don't worry about data. David in Lawrence, Kansas, the home of the great University of Kansas Jayhawks, says, has RFK Jr. gone after tobacco companies? Seems an obvious target. No, he has not. Barely one mention. He hasn't, because they're a powerful interest that Trump cares about and Republicans care about. So he hasn't. I'm going to make a prediction, which I didn't believe until the last week or two. RFK is a short-termer. He serves at the mercy of Trump, and I think he's beginning to hit the point where he's going to be an embarrassment and a liability. The minute that happens, RFK is out the door.
How does he embarrass Trump?
Because basically when he says, kids shouldn't be vaccinated, when he says basically we're going to, we're not going to, wait, let me finish. Yes, let me finish. When he doesn't respond actively to a measles outbreak, when he appoints quacks to top positions, when you have people like Paul Offit going on television, it accumulates after a while. And you can't destroy the CDC and destroy that. You can do it short term, but long term, you're going to pay a price.
Well, I saw all the former CDC directors wrote the piece. I guess it was in the Times. And everything you say is true. I don't know if any of that bothers Trump, or he doesn't agree with 85% of it, or think that his people agree with it. I don't. Look, I think the guy's an embarrassment. I think he's dismantling public health like we've never seen before. I think he's going to cost, I don't know, hundreds, I don't know how many lives, but it's going to be a lot here and around the world. But I'm not sure any of this embarrasses Trump. That's my only point. But it should.
Well, it doesn't until, you can show that it's happening. But I guess my point is Trump has no loyalty to RFK or anyone else for that matter. So if he shows signs of becoming a liability, he'll be out the door that day. Jim in Houston, Texas says, what's the best way to get the attention of the Democratic Party with an idea or suggestion for the average citizen, James?
Well, That's such a good question. I wish we would have gotten a little bit deeper there, but Ron Brownstein said something that I profoundly agree with. I mean, like 100% agree with. And this is the frustrating thing. The Democratic Party is not going to be able to have a leader until we have a presidential nominee. And in the expectation that we can come up with that, and there's some way that we could do that, it is just not attainable. I do think that in 2026, we're going to have a successful year. And, Trump came to say he wanted the job to do certain things, and he's done none of them. And all the things he's done has not made the country stronger. It's made the country weaker. It's increased our debt. We've run off our allies. We've run off everything. And now we're running off people on Medicare. I think we got a strong inherent message there, but I don't think we're going to be able to come up with something unified until the 2028 primaries.
Yeah. Arthur in Covington, Kentucky says, with Trump's cuts to Medicare forcing hospitals, particularly Medicaid, this is actually forcing hospitals to close, and many people in rural communities having to travel for hours to get seen by a doctor, is Trump just so stupid he doesn't realize the impact of cutting these programs? No. What they're going to do, they're going to lie about it. They've already changed the name of the big, beautiful bill. Now it's the Working Family Bill. That's just as much of a misnomer. Rural hospitals are starting to close, and the Medicaid cuts haven't really taken effect yet. And it's going to be a liability. Is it going to be a big liability? Probably not. But if it changes a couple percentage points in some of those rural areas, in some of those key states, like North Carolina, Michigan, then it's going to make a difference, because it is going to happen.
Well, the other thing you got to combine it with are the tax cuts for rich people, all right? Because you knew who these people were, because every time they get into power, they try to cut taxes on rich people and at the same time cut healthcare access to middle class people. They've done what you thought they were going to do. They can call that bill anything they want. It was the most negatively viewed piece of major legislation, I'm sure, in this century, domestic legislation. And it's got nothing but, it's not doing anything but getting worse. These guys cannot go anywhere in the district. They can't have town halls. Dan Sullivan is all over Alaska hiding from as many people as he can hide from. And they're dying not to have to go confront anybody, and they're just not going to get away with it in the election.
Well, and they said that they would, over the August recess, they could sell this thing. Well, it was so bad, not only did they run from their constituents, they now decided they're going to rename it. And that would suggest that maybe the August experience wasn't a very good one for them, James.
I think it was a disaster. And I think these guys are going back and said, oh, shit. And then but I loved that the congressional Republican leadership sends a memo and says, you should talk about it here, but don't do it. We don't recommend that you go to any town halls to sell it.
Don't talk to voters. Go on Fox News. And
I think that their talking points are pretty ineffective.
James, I have a really challenging one for you. Alexandra in France, a former Oregonian, says, would Vance be worse than Trump?
God, it's probably, because he's smarter and he's younger. What do you say, Albert? I say he would. I say his youth and his IQ would make him even worse than Trump.
I think conventionally I would agree. But, as much as I think Trump is a danger, he has an ability to appeal to certain type of voters, to get demagogue and effective. Well, I'm not sure Vance has that same talent. He is smarter. He is, but, Vance may do slightly better in a suburb than Trump would do, but I'm not sure he would do as well in a working class community as Trump does.
I think there's some weakness he doesn't have. Trump's, kind of bravado. I don't know what
animal instincts.
But, I think that Russell Voigt, I've always thought this the most dangerous person in the United States government. And I think Vance would keep him. And I think the two of them, if just assume that he could get into office, which I don't, but
Russell Voigt, yeah.
Deadly.
Yeah. James David in Zellwood, Florida. You may know where Zellwood, Florida is. I don't.
To be honest with you, I'll look it up.
We'll find out. He says, can you break down Trump's argument for the so-called big, beautiful bill and lay out the counter argument? The argument for it is simply to lie. Say it's for working class people. You get tax cuts with tips and all that stuff. The argument against it is quite simple. They've gone and they're giving a huge tax cut to the rich, and they're taking health care away from working class Americans.
Yes, in your explanation. And remember, there's nothing in politics that works better than to confirm a pre-existing suspicion. You knew what they were going to do. They did exactly what they do every time. All right. This is the effect of it. And the public is on your side. I mean, we won this war before the first shot was fired because people know that that's their instinct to do whenever they get into power. They always do that.
Yeah, it sure is. John in Chicago, James, asked you, this is you talk about one right down the middle of the plate for you, Mr. Carville. John says, does political party loyalty taint the conservative judges on the Supreme Court, or are they strict enforcers of Article 2 of the Constitution?
Let me explain this to you. If you want to know what the Supreme Court is going to do, think of what the executive committee of the Republican Party of Northern Alabama would do. All right? This is a...
I knew this would be a tough one for you.
They just people don't read the law. They don't ask for statutory history or, anything else. They say what result is the best for the Republican Party, and then that's how we're going to vote. And I don't. And you know what's really interesting is they don't even assign reasons anymore. And
that's true.
So a lot of law court judges don't know how to interpret, what exactly to do because they're so arrogant. They're so nakedly political. They're such an adjunct and they're completely part of the Republican Party. They get a question and they said, okay, does this hurt Republicans? It helps. Okay, great. It hurts. We'll turn it over. And that's it. And what do you have to tell you? They got now to the point where they have to even assign reasons. Usually people will tell you why, but they don't feel good.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, thanks for those questions. They really are. They are so stimulating. They are so good. If we didn't get to yours, please send it again next week. We'll try to get to it then. Hey, thanks for listening to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. As always, send your questions for us by email to politicswarroom@gmail.com or tweet them for next week's show @Politicon. Following this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you check out the links to our sponsors, Green Chef and Beam, in the episode show notes. We thank you for supporting them because when you do, it helps make this podcast happen. To keep up with us, subscribe to Politics War Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And check out our Substack at politicswarroom.com. James and I are constantly adding new content, so go take a look. You also can find other shows you might enjoy on the Politicon YouTube channel or when you search Politicon on your favorite podcast sites. Now remember, please rate the show with a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with another show as we continue our War Room planning.